The contract had been burning a hole in Isaac Zimmerman's saddlebag for 3 days, and when he finally found the orc girl bathing in the creek at sunset, he understood why his hands had been shaking every time he touched the parchment. She hadn't heard him approach, which was his specialty after 15 years tracking fugitives across the frontier territories. Isaac stood in the shadow of a massive oak tree, one hand resting on the pommel of his sword, the other clutching the contract that bore her name and promised him enough gold to retire from this blood-soaked profession forever. Kessa of the Ironjaw clan, wanted for the murder of 3 human merchants on the old trade road, believed to be hiding in the wilderness between Thornvale and the Bitter Mountains. Bring proof of death. The signature at the bottom belonged to Lord Merchand, a name that carried weight in 5 territories. The orc girl rose from the water, and Isaac's breath caught in his throat. She was younger than he had expected, perhaps 19 or 20 summers at most. Her skin was the deep green of summer leaves, marked with old scars that told stories of survival. Her tusks were small and elegant, curving up from her lower jaw in a way that somehow made her face more striking rather than monstrous. Dark hair fell wet down her back, and her build was strong without being bulky, athletic in the way of someone who had spent their life moving through difficult terrain. She dressed quickly in simple leather clothing, clearly designed for travel and practicality rather than comfort. Isaac noticed how her hands moved with careful precision, how her eyes constantly scanned the tree line even as she braided her hair. This was not someone careless. This was not someone who would have walked into an ambush on a trade road and murdered 3 men without reason. Something twisted in Isaac's gut, the same instinct that had kept him alive through countless dangerous hunts. Something about this contract was wrong. He waited until she had gathered her belongings and started walking back toward what he assumed was her camp before he made his decision. Instead of drawing his blade, he stepped out into the open and called out, "Kessa of the Ironjaw clan." She spun with a speed that would have impressed any warrior, a knife appearing in her hand as if by magic. Her eyes were amber, sharp and intelligent, and they fixed on him with an intensity that made Isaac very aware of how alone they were in this stretch of wilderness. "Who are you?" Her voice was lower than he expected, steady despite the obvious surprise of being found. She spoke the common tongue with only the slightest accent, the kind that suggested she had spent time around humans before. "My name is Isaac Zimmerman. I am a bounty hunter." He kept his hands visible, away from his weapons. "I have a contract for your capture or death." She did not run, which surprised him. Instead, she studied him with those amber eyes, her grip on the knife never wavering. "And you announce yourself rather than simply shooting me with that crossbow on your back. You are either honorable or stupid. Maybe both." Isaac took a slow breath. "I want to hear your side of what happened on the trade road before I make any decisions." "Why would you care about my side?" Kessa's voice carried decades of learned bitterness despite her youth. "I am an orc. 3 human merchants are dead. The story is already written in the minds of your people. Humor me," she laughed, but there was no joy in it. "You hold my life in your hands, bounty hunter, and you ask me to humor you." She was quiet for a long moment, then seemed to come to some internal decision. "I did not kill those merchants. I tried to save them." Isaac settled his weight, making no move toward his weapons. "Tell me." Kessa's jaw tightened, and Isaac could see the war happening behind her eyes. Finally, she lowered her knife slightly, though she kept it in her hand. "I was traveling south to find work as a tracker. My clan had exiled me for refusing an arranged marriage to a warrior I did not respect. I had been on my own for 2 weeks when I heard screaming from the trade road. When I reached the merchant's wagon, bandits were already attacking. 5 of them, humans all, with faces covered. And you decided to help. I am not a monster, despite what your contract surely says. Her voice was sharp now, defensive. I killed 2 of the bandits before the others fled, but by then, 2 of the merchants were already dead. The third was dying, and he looked up at me with such fear in his eyes. He begged me not to hurt him. I tried to tell him I had helped, but he just kept screaming until he bled out. She looked away toward the darkening forest. I buried all 5 bodies because it seemed the right thing to do. And then I ran, because I knew exactly what the story would become if I stayed. Isaac felt the familiar weight of injustice settling on his shoulders. He had heard enough lies in his career to recognize truth when he encountered it, and every instinct told him Kessa was telling him what actually happened. Why did the bandits attack those particular merchants? They were carrying mining documents. I saw them scattered around the wagon. Legal deeds to some kind of claim in the Bitter Mountains. Kessa met his eyes again. The seals on those documents belonged to Lord Merchand, and there it was, the piece that made everything fall into place. Isaac had wondered why a frontier lord would personally post such a large bounty for a single orc accused of murder. Highway bandits were common enough in these territories. But if Kessa had witnessed something related to Merchand's business dealings, if there were legal documents that went missing after an attack he might have orchestrated himself, then she was not a criminal to be brought to justice. She was a loose end to be eliminated. I believe you, Isaac said quietly. Kessa's expression flickered with something between hope and disbelief. What? I said I believe you. This contract smelled wrong from the moment I accepted it. Too much gold for too simple a job. And Lord Merchand is not known for his concern over murdered merchants, unless they were specifically his merchants. So you will let me go? Kessa's voice was careful, controlled, as if she was afraid to believe what he seemed to be offering. Isaac pulled the contract from his saddlebag and looked at it in the fading light. It really was an enormous sum. Enough to buy land, enough to stop chasing desperate people through the wilderness, enough to build something resembling a normal life. His hands held his future, and hers on a single piece of parchment. He had always told himself he was not a good man, just a practical one. Good men did not make their living hunting other people for money. Good men did not become so skilled at tracking and killing that lords across 5 territories knew their name. But perhaps there were some lines even he would not cross. Isaac walked to a nearby tree where dry leaves had gathered at the base. He knelt down and placed the contract among them, then struck flint to steel. The sparks caught, and within moments the parchment was burning, curling into black ash as flames consumed the words that had condemned Kessa to death. What are you doing? Kessa had moved closer, her voice filled with genuine shock. Something stupid, probably. Isaac watched the last of the contract burn away. But I have been doing this work for 15 years, and I have never felt good about it. Maybe that is a sign I should have paid attention to earlier. You just destroyed a fortune. I destroyed a lie. Isaac stood and brushed ash from his hands. A fortune built on your corpse is not one I want. Kessa stared at him in the near darkness, her amber eyes reflecting the dying flames. I do not understand you, Isaac Zimmerman. That makes 2 of us. He managed a tired smile. Do you have a camp nearby? We should probably discuss what happens next. Lord Merchand is not going to simply forget about you because I burned a contract. He will send others. She hesitated, and Isaac could see her weighing whether to trust him. Finally, she nodded. Follow me, and bounty hunter. If this is some elaborate trap, I will kill you. I would expect nothing less. Kessa's camp was well hidden in a dense thicket about half a mile from the creek. She had constructed a small lean-to from branches and oiled cloth, and a fire ring sat cold and unused in front of it. Everything was organized with military precision, her bedroll carefully placed to allow for quick escape, her supplies stored in easily grabbed packs. "You do not light fires," Isaac observed as they entered the small clearing. "Fires attract attention." Kessa settled onto a fallen log and gestured for him to sit across from her. "I have been on the run for 3 months. You learn quickly what risks you can take." Isaac sat, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. Now that he was committed to this course, he found himself studying her more carefully. She had an angular beauty that human prejudice trained people not to see, and there was a directness to her gaze that he found strangely compelling. Most people looked away when he stared at them. Kessa met his eyes without flinching. 3 months is a long time to be alone in the wilderness, he said. "I am used to being alone. My clan never truly accepted me, even before the exile. My mother was a healer who believed in peaceful coexistence with humans, which made her weak in the eyes of traditionalists. When she died birthing my younger brother, who did not survive, I became a reminder of everything the hardliners in the clan despised. I am sorry." Kessa's expression flickered with surprise. Humans do not usually apologize to orcs for anything. Most humans are idiots. Isaac leaned back against a tree trunk. "I have traveled through orc territories before. I have seen your healers work, seen the way your people care for your elderly and children. The stories humans tell themselves about orcs being mindless savages are just comfortable lies to justify prejudice. You are a strange bounty hunter. I am starting to realize that." Isaac was quiet for a moment, thinking through their options. "Lord Merchand will not stop hunting you. Even if I tell him you are dead, he will want proof, and if I cannot provide it, he will assume I failed or was bribed. Your best option is to get far enough away that his influence does not reach, which means crossing the scarred wastes to the eastern territories. A journey that takes months and crosses some of the most dangerous land on the continent." "Yes." Kessa studied him. "And you are telling me this why?" "Bounty hunter Isaac Zimmerman, who burns contracts and gives his targets advice on how to escape. What do you want from me?" It was a fair question. Isaac was not entirely sure he knew the answer. "Maybe I am tired of being the person who brings people to unjust ends. Maybe I saw you in that creek and realized you deserved a chance no one was going to give you. Or maybe I am just getting old and sentimental. You are not that old, 40 at most. 38, but close enough." He smiled slightly. "And you are avoiding my suggestion about the Eastern Territories. Because I cannot make that journey alone. The scarred wastes are called that for a reason. Bandits, wild beasts, worse things according to the stories. Even an experienced tracker like myself would be taking a terrible risk." Kessa's hands twisted together in what he recognized as frustration. "And I have no money to hire protection, no connections to join a caravan. I am trapped here in this wilderness, waiting for the next bounty hunter to come along, and hoping the next one is not as skilled as you at tracking." The solution was obvious, even if it was completely insane. Isaac had already destroyed his professional reputation by burning that contract. If he returned to the settlements without proof of completion, word would spread quickly that he had failed to deliver. No lord or sheriff would trust him with contracts after this, which meant his career as a bounty hunter was effectively over regardless of what he did next. So why not do something completely reckless? "I could guide you," Isaac heard himself say. "I have crossed the scarred wastes twice before. I know the safe routes, or as safe as any route gets in that region. With 2 of us traveling together, the odds improve significantly." Kessa's eyes went wide. "You would abandon your entire life to help an orc fugitive reach safety." "My entire life is already abandoned." The moment I lit that contract on fire, I made my choice. He met her gaze steadily. And maybe it is time for me to do something I can actually feel good about. This is madness, probably. You do not even know me. I know you helped 3 strangers being attacked by bandits. I know you buried 5 people you had no obligation to. I know you have survived 3 months in hostile territory through skill and intelligence. That is enough for me. Kessa was quiet for a long time, her amber eyes searching his face as if looking for the lie or the trap. Isaac let her look, keeping his expression open and honest. He had made stranger decisions in his life, though admittedly not many. If we do this, she said finally, we do it as equals. I am not some helpless girl who needs rescuing. I can fight, I can hunt, I can track almost as well as you, probably. We share the work and the decisions. Agreed. And if you betray me, I will gut you and leave you for the carrion birds. Also agreed. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, the first genuine expression of anything other than wariness he had seen from her. It transformed her face in a way that made Isaac's heart do something complicated in his chest. Then we have an arrangement, bounty hunter. When do we leave? Tomorrow at dawn. We will need to move quickly once we start. I have a reputation in these territories, which means people will notice if I am traveling with an orc. The faster we can get beyond the frontier settlements, the better. I will be ready. Kessa stood and moved to her lean-to, beginning to efficiently pack her few belongings. You should rest. I will take first watch. You do not trust me to keep watch while you sleep. Not yet, but perhaps in time. She glanced at him over her shoulder. You burned the contract, Isaac Zimmerman. That buys you the benefit of doubt, but not yet my full trust. That must be earned. Fair enough. Isaac found a comfortable spot against a tree where he could keep Kessa in his peripheral vision while appearing to rest. He did not actually expect to sleep much. His mind was still racing with the implications of what he had just committed to. And there was a knot of something unfamiliar in his chest every time he looked at the orc girl, efficiently preparing for their journey. This was either the best decision he had ever made or the one that would finally get him killed. Given his track record, it was probably both. They set out before the sun had fully risen, moving through the forest with the efficient silence of 2 people who knew how to travel without leaving obvious trails. Isaac led for the first few hours, using his knowledge of the terrain to guide them away from the common paths and settlements. Kessa followed with an easy grace that confirmed her claims about being an experienced tracker. She moved through the undergrowth without disturbing branches, placed her feet carefully to avoid leaving deep prints, and maintained a spacing that kept them close enough to communicate with hand signals, but far enough apart to avoid being caught together by a surprise attack. They did not speak until midday when Isaac called for a brief rest near a stream. Both of them drank deeply and refilled their waterskins before Kessa broke the silence. You move well for a human, better than most. I had a good teacher. Old ranger named Marcus who took me in when I was 14. He taught me how to track, how to survive in the wild, how to fight when necessary. Isaac secured his waterskin to his belt. He would probably be disappointed to see what I made of those skills. Why bounty hunting? There are other ways to use tracking abilities. Money, mainly. And the fact that I was not good at taking orders, which made military service unappealing. Bounty hunting let me work alone and make enough coin to survive comfortably. He paused. Looking back, I think I also liked the simplicity of it. Clear objectives, clear rewards, no moral ambiguity or complicated decisions. Except it was never that simple. No, it never was. Isaac met her eyes. What about you? You mentioned wanting to work as a tracker before everything happened with the merchants. Kessa settled onto a flat rock, her posture alert even while resting. My mother taught me herbalism and healing, but I had no talent for it. My hands were always too clumsy with delicate work. But tracking, hunting, reading the signs of the forest, that came naturally. I thought if I could not find acceptance in my clan, perhaps I could find purpose helping others navigate the wilderness safely. It seems the universe had different plans. The universe has a cruel sense of humor sometimes. This is truth. She tilted her head, studying him again with that direct gaze. You are not what I expected when you revealed yourself yesterday. What did you expect? Someone harder, colder. Bounty hunters in stories are always ruthless men who care only for gold and reputation. You burn contracts and offer to guide your targets to safety. It does not match the stories. Isaac laughed, though there was little humor in it. I have done plenty of things I am not proud of, Kessa. Do not mistake one good decision for redemption. I have dragged fugitives back to face unjust courts. I have killed men who might have deserved mercy. I have looked the other way when contracts smelled wrong because the money was too good. Yesterday was not the first time I suspected a contract was based on lies. It was just the first time I did something about it. Why this time? It was a question Isaac had been asking himself since he struck the flint. He looked at Kessa, at the way sunlight filtered through the trees and illuminated her green skin, at the strength and intelligence in her amber eyes, at the small tusks that marked her as other in a world that treated different as dangerous. I am not sure, he admitted. Maybe because you are young enough that I see the years of life ahead of you. Maybe because the contract was so obviously corrupt. Maybe because I looked at you and saw someone brave instead of someone criminal. Or maybe I was just finally ready to stop being the man I have been and try to become someone better. Kessa's expression softened slightly. That is a significant maybe. It is a beginning at least. They traveled for 2 more weeks through the frontier wilderness, staying well away from settlements and known roads. Isaac had cached supplies in various locations during his years of bounty hunting, and they visited 3 of these hidden stores to replenish their food and trade out worn equipment. Each camp they made was cold and dark, with no fires to mark their position. They ate dried meat and hard bread, rationed their water carefully, and took turns on watch through every night. During those weeks, something shifted between them in gradual increments. Kessa began to relax around Isaac, her hand moving less frequently to her knife when he approached. She started sharing stories about her childhood in the Ironjaw clan, about her mother's gentle wisdom and her father's stern but loving discipline. Isaac found himself talking about his own past more than he had with anyone in years, sharing memories of his teacher Marcus and the various contracts that had taken him across the frontier territories. They discovered they shared a similar sense of humor, dry and slightly dark, and their evenings on watch became punctuated with quiet laughter at observations about their situation. Kessa did an absolutely devastating impression of how Lord Merchand probably reacted to news that Isaac had disappeared without delivering her corpse, complete with exaggerated gestures and creative cursing. Isaac reciprocated with his interpretation of what the orc traditionalists in her clan likely said about her at council fires, which made Kessa laugh so hard she had to cover her mouth to maintain their silence discipline. But there were other moments too, ones that carried a different kind of weight. Times when Isaac would catch himself watching the way Kessa braided her hair in the mornings, or noting how her eyes caught the light. Moments when their hands would brush while passing supplies, and both of them would freeze for half a heartbeat, before continuing as if nothing had happened. Nights when they would sit across from each other on watch, and Isaac would wonder what it would be like to cross that small distance between them. He did not act on any of these impulses. Kessa had lost her home, her clan, and 3 months of her life running from false accusations. The last thing she needed was an aging bounty hunter complicating her situation with unwanted romantic attention. So Isaac kept his growing feelings carefully locked away and focused on the practical work of getting them both safely to the Eastern Territories. On the 16th day of their journey, they finally reached the edge of the scarred wastes. The landscape transformed dramatically from dense forest to broken badlands, all red rock and deep canyons carved by ancient rivers. It was beautiful in a harsh way, and incredibly dangerous. Water was scarce, shade was rare, and the broken terrain provided countless hiding places for bandits and predators. "We need to be extremely careful from here forward," Isaac said as they stood on a ridge overlooking the wastes. "There are 3 main dangers in this region. First are the human bandit clans who operate out of the canyon systems. Second are the rock drakes, large reptilian predators that hunt in packs. Third is the heat itself, which can kill you just as surely as a blade if you are not prepared." Kessa surveyed the landscape with a tracker's eye. "How long to cross?" "At least 3 weeks, possibly 4 depending on conditions and how much trouble we encounter. There are a few scattered water sources if you know where to look, and some abandoned way station structures where we can shelter during the worst heat of the day." "And the route?" Isaac pulled out a worn map from his pack and spread it on a flat rock. "We follow this canyon system south for the first week. It is longer than the direct route, but there is a reliable spring about halfway through and better cover from both the sun and potential attacks. After that, we cut east across open ground to reach the old merchant road. Once we are on that road, it is another week to the eastern settlements where Merchand's influence does not reach." Kessa traced the route with her finger, her expression thoughtful. "The open ground crossing is when we are most vulnerable. Yes, that is where we are most likely to encounter bandits or drakes. We will need to move fast and stay alert." Isaac met her eyes. "If something happens to me during that stretch, do not stop or try to help. You run and you keep running until you reach safety." "Absolutely not. Kessa, be reasonable. If I fall, there is no point in both of us." "I said no, Isaac Zimmerman." Her voice was firm, her amber eyes flashing with determination. "We are partners in this journey, equal partners as we agreed. I do not leave people behind, and I certainly do not abandon someone who burned a fortune to save my life. We cross together or not at all." Isaac felt something warm and complicated unfold in his chest. No one had insisted on standing by him in years. Bounty hunting was a solitary profession, and he had long ago accepted that he would live and die alone. The idea that this orc girl he had known for barely 2 weeks was willing to risk herself for him was both terrifying and deeply moving. "You are stubborn," he said quietly. "Yes. And you are stuck with me, so get used to it." A smile pulled at Isaac's mouth. "I am starting to think that might not be such a terrible fate." Kessa's expression softened, and for a moment something passed between them, an understanding or acknowledgement that neither was quite ready to name. Then she rolled up the map and handed it back to him. "We should move before the sun gets higher. The heat will be brutal by midday." They descended into the canyon system as the morning light painted the red rocks in shades of orange and gold. The temperature climbed steadily, and by noon they were both sweating despite the shade provided by the canyon walls. Isaac led them to a small cave he remembered from previous crossings, and they sheltered there through the worst heat of the afternoon, conserving water and energy. As they sat in the relative cool of the cave, Kessa spoke suddenly. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Have you ever been in love?" The question caught Isaac off guard. He was quiet for a moment, sorting through memories he usually kept buried. Once, a long time ago. Her name was Margaret, and she was the daughter of the mayor in a small frontier town. I was 22 and stupid, and I thought I could balance a life with her and my work as a bounty hunter. I was wrong. What happened? She asked me to choose, her or the work. I chose the work because I told myself it was temporary, that I just needed a few more big contracts to save enough money for us to settle down properly. By the time I came back 3 months later, she had married the blacksmith's son. I was angry at first, but eventually I understood. She deserved someone who would be there, not someone who disappeared for months chasing dangerous people through the wilderness. Kessa was quiet, absorbing this. "Do you regret it?" Every day for about 5 years. Then less and less as time passed until it just became a dull ache I learned to ignore. I told myself I was not built for that kind of life, that I was meant to be alone. Isaac turned to look at her. "What about you? Beyond the arranged marriage you refused, has there been anyone? No one serious?" "There was a boy in a neighboring clan when I was 16, and we thought ourselves desperately in love for about 3 months, until we realized we had nothing in common except physical attraction. And there was a human trapper I met while hunting 2 years ago. We spent a week together, and it was nice, but when it ended we both knew it was nothing more than temporary companionship." She pulled her knees up to her chest. "I used to worry I was broken somehow, that I could not feel the deep romantic love the bards sing about. But my mother told me once that real love is not the lightning strike of instant passion. It grows slowly from respect and trust and choosing each other day after day." "Your mother sounds like she was wise." "She was." Kessa's voice was soft with old grief. "I miss her still." Isaac found himself moving closer, closing some of the distance between them. "For what it is worth, I do not think you are broken. I think you are careful with your heart, which is not the same thing." Kessa met his eyes, and in the dim light of the cave, Isaac could see something vulnerable and uncertain in her expression. "And you, bounty hunter, are you careful with your heart?" "I used to think I did not have much of a heart left to be careful with." Isaac's voice was barely above a whisper. "But lately, I have been wondering if maybe I was wrong about that." The air between them felt charged with possibility. Isaac was intensely aware of how close they were sitting, of the way Kessa's breathing had changed, of the fact that she was not pulling away. His hand moved of its own accord, reaching up to gently brush a strand of dark hair from her face. Kessa's breath hitched, but she leaned into the touch rather than retreating. "Isaac!" A sound from outside the cave froze them both. Voices, human, speaking in the rough dialect of the waste bandits. Isaac's hand dropped to his sword as he moved silently to the cave entrance, Kessa right behind him with her knife drawn. There were 4 of them, rough-looking men in patchwork armor, leading horses laden with supplies that almost certainly came from robbery. They had not spotted the cave yet, but they were moving in a direction that would bring them past the entrance within minutes. Isaac gestured for Kessa to move deeper into the cave, into the shadows where she would be less visible. She shook her head stubbornly, but he gave her a look that brooked no argument. If the bandits spotted them, he needed her to have the element of surprise, not to be standing in plain sight. Reluctantly, Kessa retreated, melting into the darkness with impressive stealth. Isaac positioned himself just inside the cave entrance, hand on his sword, and waited. The bandits passed within 20 feet of the cave, close enough that Isaac could hear their conversation clearly. "Still say we should have killed that merchant rather than just taking his goods," one was saying. "Loose ends always come back to bite you." "He was too scared to report anything," another replied. "Besides, Lord Merchant does not care what we do out here as long as we pay his tribute." "That is the arrangement." Isaac's jaw tightened. So Merchant had connections to the waste bandits. That added another layer of complication to an already dangerous situation. The bandits moved past without spotting the cave, their voices fading as they continued down the canyon. Isaac waited a full 10 minutes, listening carefully for any sign they might return, before finally relaxing his grip on his sword. Kessa emerged from the shadows. "Did you hear what they said about Lord Merchant?" "Yes. It confirms he is more corrupt than I thought. Probably has been using these bandits to harass legitimate merchants while protecting his own operations." Isaac frowned. "We need to be even more careful. If Merchant has influence out here, it is possible he has put word out about both of us." "Would he do that?" "Risk his reputation by admitting he placed a false bounty." He would phrase it differently. "Probably say I went rogue, kidnapped you instead of killing you, imply I am unstable or compromised." It would ruin my professional reputation, while giving him justification for putting a bounty on my head too. Kessa swore in Orcish, a string of words that Isaac did not understand but whose meaning was clear from the tone. "So now we are both fugitives." "Looks that way." This keeps getting better and better. Despite the seriousness of their situation, Isaac found himself smiling. "At least we have each other." Kessa's expression softened. "Yes, we do have that." She moved closer to him again, recreating the charged intimacy from before the bandits interrupted. "Isaac, what was about to happen between us earlier, you do not have to say anything. I understand if this situation is complicated enough without adding." Kessa pressed her finger to his lips, silencing him. "Let me finish. What was about to happen earlier, I wanted it. I still want it. But I need to know if this is real for you or if you are just feeling protective of the fugitive orc girl you rescued." Isaac gently took her hand, moving it from his lips but keeping it clasped in his. "Kessa, I have been protecting people for money for 15 years. That is not what this is. You are brave and clever and strong, and you make me laugh even when we are hiding in a cave from bandits. When I look at you, I do not see someone who needs rescuing. I see someone I want to stand beside, someone who makes me want to be better than I have been." He took a breath. "And yes, I am attracted to you in ways that have nothing to do with protection or nobility. If that makes this complicated, I am sorry, but you asked for honesty." Kessa's amber eyes searched his face, and Isaac forced himself to stay still under that intense scrutiny. Finally, she smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face. "I am attracted to you too, bounty hunter, even though you are human and probably should be my enemy according to both our peoples. Even though we have only known each other 2 weeks and are currently fleeing for our lives across a desert wasteland. I find myself thinking about you constantly, wondering what would have happened if we met under different circumstances, if maybe we could build something lasting instead of just surviving. I think about that too. Then perhaps we should stop thinking and do something about it." Kessa leaned in and kissed him. It was gentle at first, tentative, both of them figuring out how to navigate the physical differences between them. Her tusks made the angle slightly different than what Isaac was used to. But after a moment, they found a way that worked, and then gentleness transformed into something more urgent and passionate. Isaac's hands came up to frame her face, and Kessa made a small sound of pleasure that sent heat racing through his veins. They broke apart after a long moment, both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. "That was nice," Kessa said, her voice slightly dazed. "Nice is an understatement." She laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "We should probably figure out what we are doing here before we get too distracted. Are we together now? Is this a relationship or just two people seeking comfort in a difficult situation?" Isaac pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "What do you want it to be?" "I want it to be real. I want to see where this goes when we are not running for our lives. I want to know what it is like to build something with you." She hesitated. "But I am also terrified because I have never done this before, not for real, and I have no idea how we make it work when the entire world will see us as wrong." "We figure it out together," Isaac said simply. "One day at a time, one decision at a time. And if it stops working, we are honest about it. But I want to try, Kessa. I want this to be real too." She kissed him again, softer this time, a promise rather than passion. "Then we are together, you and I, partners in survival and apparently in romance." Apparently. They stayed in the cave until the worst heat of the day had passed, though they were decidedly less focused on resting than they probably should have been. There was a giddy quality to their conversation now, an openness that came from having acknowledged what was growing between them. Isaac found himself telling her stories he had not shared with anyone, and Kessa opened up about her fears and hopes for the future with a vulnerability that made his chest ache. As sunset painted the canyon walls in shades of purple and red, they finally emerged and continued their journey. They traveled through the night, using the cooler hours to make up time, and Isaac found himself hyper-aware of Kessa's presence beside him. Every accidental brush of hands felt electric. Every time she smiled at him, warmth bloomed in his chest. This was dangerous, he knew. Letting himself care this much for someone made him vulnerable in ways that could get them both killed. But Isaac found he did not care about the danger. For the first time in 15 years, he felt truly alive rather than just surviving from one contract to the next. They reached the spring Isaac had mentioned around midday of the third day in the wastes. It was a small oasis of green in the red rock desert, with clear water bubbling up from deep underground to form a pool surrounded by scrub vegetation. They refilled all their containers, washed the dust from their skin and clothes, and rested in the shade of the rocks. "This place is beautiful," Kessa said, lying on her back near the pool and watching clouds drift across the brilliant blue sky. Isaac stretched out beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "It is. I camped here for 3 days once while tracking a fugitive through the wastes. It felt like the last peaceful place in the world." "You miss it? The work, I mean, the clarity of having a target and a goal." "Sometimes. Mostly, I miss the feeling of being good at something, of having a purpose that made sense. But I do not miss the moral compromises or the way I stopped seeing the people I was hunting as individuals with stories." He turned his head to look at her. "I definitely do not miss the loneliness. You were lonely." It was not a question, but Isaac answered anyway, desperately. "For years. I just got very good at ignoring it." Kessa rolled onto her side to face him, propping her head on her hand. "I understand that. Being surrounded by clan but never truly belonging is its own kind of loneliness. At least when I was exiled, I could stop pretending to fit. Do you think you will ever go back? I do not know. Part of me wants to believe that someday the Ironjaw clan will realize their rigid traditions are destroying them, that they will become more accepting, and I could return. But a larger part of me knows that is a fantasy. My clan is old and set in its ways. Change comes slowly to orc societies, if at all. Then we build something new," Isaac said. "In the Eastern Territories, we find a place where we can be ourselves without having to hide or apologize. It will not be easy, and there will always be people who judge us, but maybe we can carve out a life anyway." Kessa reached out and traced the line of his jaw with her fingertips, her touch gentle. "You make it sound possible when you say it like that. That is because it is possible. Difficult, but possible." She leaned in and kissed him, slow and sweet, and Isaac lost himself in the sensation of her lips, the scent of her skin, the way her hair fell around them like a curtain. They stayed by the pool for hours, talking and kissing and dreaming about futures that seemed less impossible with each passing moment. It was perhaps the most peaceful afternoon of Isaac's entire adult life. The peace shattered 3 days later when they ran into the rock drakes. They were crossing a narrow section of canyon when the attack came. Isaac saw movement on the rocks above them and had just enough time to shout a warning before the first drake leaped down. It was massive, easily 7 feet long with scales that matched the red rock perfectly. Its jaws were lined with serrated teeth, and its claws could shred armor. There were 4 of them, hunting as a pack, and they were fast. Isaac drew his sword and managed to intercept the first drake before it reached Kessa, his blade scoring a deep cut along its flank. The creature shrieked and fell back, but the other 3 were already attacking. Kessa moved with lethal efficiency, her knife flashing as she dodged and struck, dancing around the drake's lunging attacks with incredible agility. But they were outnumbered and being pressed back against the canyon wall. Isaac felt claws rake across his shoulder, hot pain blooming as blood soaked his shirt. He spun and drove his sword through the drake's neck, killing it, but the effort left him open, and another drake slammed into his side with enough force to crack ribs. He went down hard, stars exploding across his vision, and through the pain he saw a drake lunging for Kessa's back while she was engaged with another. Isaac tried to shout a warning but could not get enough air into his damaged lungs. Kessa somehow sensed the danger and rolled aside at the last second, coming up with her knife and driving it into the drake's eye socket. The creature spasmed and died, but its death throes knocked Kessa off her feet and into the side of the canyon. Isaac saw blood on her forehead where she had struck the rock. The remaining 2 drakes circled, sensing wounded prey. Isaac forced himself to his feet despite the screaming pain in his ribs and moved to stand between the drakes and Kessa. His sword felt impossibly heavy, but he raised it anyway. "Come on then," he rasped. The drakes attacked together, and Isaac knew with absolute certainty that he was about to die. He could barely stand, let alone fight off 2 of these creatures. But he would buy Kessa time to recover, time to run, time to survive. That was enough. Then Kessa was beside him, knife in one hand and a rock in the other, blood streaming down her face but her eyes blazing with determination. "I told you I do not abandon partners," she said. They fought back to back, exhausted and wounded, against creatures that should have killed them easily. But desperation lent them strength, and more importantly, they fought as a perfect team. Where Isaac's sword created openings, Kessa's knife exploited them. When the drakes tried to flank them, they adjusted their position in perfect synchronization. They had only known each other a few weeks, but in that canyon, they moved like they had been fighting together for years. Finally, impossibly, the last drake fell, Isaac's sword buried in its chest. He pulled the blade free and immediately collapsed to his knees, the adrenaline that had been keeping him upright flooding out of his system. The pain in his ribs was excruciating, and his shoulder was still bleeding freely. Kessa dropped beside him, pressing her hands to the wound on his shoulder. "Stay with me, Isaac. You are not dying in this canyon, do you understand? I refuse to allow it." "Stubborn," he managed through gritted teeth. "You have no idea." She was already pulling medical supplies from her pack with one hand while maintaining pressure on his shoulder with the other. "The ribs I can do nothing about except wrap them, but this shoulder wound needs to be cleaned and stitched immediately or you will bleed out. You said you were bad at delicate healing work. Well, you are going to have ugly scars, but I can keep you alive. Now stop talking and let me work." Isaac let her work, focusing on breathing through the pain as Kessa cleaned his wounds with water from their dwindling supplies, and then carefully stitched the deep cuts on his shoulder. Her hands were indeed less than perfectly delicate, but they were steady and competent, and by the time she finished wrapping his ribs, the worst of the bleeding had stopped. "Your turn," Isaac said, gesturing to the gash on her forehead. "It is barely a scratch. You are still bleeding." "Let me clean it at least." Kessa sighed but moved to sit in front of him. Isaac carefully cleaned the wound, which was deeper than she had implied but not dangerously so, and used a small bandage to cover it. Their faces were very close, and despite the pain and exhaustion, he found himself studying the details of her features. The particular curve of her tusks, the gold flecks in her amber eyes, the small scar on her chin that she had gotten falling from a tree as a child. "What are you thinking?" She asked softly. "That I love you." The words surprised him as much as they clearly surprised her. Kessa's eyes went wide. "What? I love you," Isaac repeated, and this time he was certain. "I know it is too soon and we are in the middle of a disaster, but I realized it while we were fighting. The thought of losing you terrified me more than my own death. You are brave and stubborn, and you make terrible jokes at inappropriate times, and somewhere in the last 3 weeks, you became the most important person in my world. I love you, Kessa of the Ironjaw clan." Tears welled in Kessa's eyes, cutting tracks through the dust and blood on her face. "You are an idiot, Isaac Zimmerman. We have known each other less than a month. We are from different species. The world will hate us for being together. This is impossible." "I know. And I love you too." She kissed him then, hard and desperate, and Isaac kissed her back despite the pain in his ribs, despite the exhaustion, despite everything. When they finally broke apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. "We are definitely going to die out here," Kessa said. "Probably. But at least we will die together." "That is oddly romantic." "I am oddly romantic sometimes." They stayed in that canyon for 2 days while Isaac's ribs healed enough for him to travel. They ate the dried meat from the drakes, which was tough but edible, and rationed their remaining water carefully. Kessa hunted a small desert rabbit one evening, which they cooked over a tiny fire made from dried scrub brush. And for a few hours, they could almost pretend they were just 2 people camping in the wilderness, rather than fugitives running from a corrupt lord. On the 3rd morning, Isaac judged himself well enough to continue. His ribs were still painful, but the worst of the danger had passed. They packed their supplies and set out toward the open ground that separated them from the old merchant road and relative safety. The crossing was every bit as dangerous as Isaac had warned. The open ground offered no shade and no cover, just miles of cracked earth and scattered rock formations baking under the relentless sun. They traveled during the coolest parts of the day and sheltered during the worst heat, but even with precautions, it was brutal. Their water ran low, then dangerously low, and by the 2nd day both of them were showing signs of heat exhaustion. Isaac was navigating by memory and the position of the sun, praying that his recollection of the terrain was accurate. If he was wrong about where the merchant road lay, they would both die of thirst before finding civilization. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, stumbling through waves of heat shimmer that made the landscape look like it was melting, Isaac saw something that made his heart leap. Trees. A thin line of green on the horizon that could only mean water and the merchant road. "There," he croaked, pointing with a shaking hand. Kessa looked where he indicated, and her face transformed with desperate hope. "How far?" 3 hours, maybe, if we push hard." They pushed hard, drawing on reserves they did not really have, driven by the promise of water and safety. The sun beat down mercilessly, and twice Kessa stumbled and nearly fell before Isaac caught her. His ribs screamed in protest, but he kept one arm around her waist, supporting her weight, and they continued forward. The trees grew slowly closer, achingly slowly, but eventually they were real instead of just a mirage. Isaac could hear running water, could see the rutted dirt of the merchant road cutting through the greenery. They had made it. They collapsed under the trees by a small stream and drank deeply, not caring about proper rationing anymore. The water was cool and clean, and Isaac thought he had never tasted anything so perfect in his entire life. He splashed water on his face and chest, washing away layers of dust and sweat, and beside him Kessa was doing the same. "We made it," she said, wonder in her voice. "We actually made it across the scarred wastes. You sound surprised. I am surprised. There were at least 4 times I was certain we were going to die." "Only 4," Isaac managed a tired smile. "I counted 6. Kessa laughed, the sound slightly hysterical with relief. "We are alive. We are alive and we are together and we are finally safe. Almost safe. We still need to reach the eastern settlements, which is another week of travel. But yes, the worst is behind us." They rested by the stream for several hours, restoring their strength and refilling all their water containers. When Isaac judged them ready to continue, they set out along the merchant road heading east. It felt surreal to be walking on an actual road after weeks in the wilderness, and even more surreal to occasionally see other travelers, though they kept their distance and did not engage in conversation. The settlements began appearing after 4 days. Small at first, just a few houses clustered around wells or crossroads, but gradually growing larger. On the 6th day, they reached a town called Millbrook, and Isaac decided it was time to stop and properly resupply. "Stay close to me," he told Kessa as they entered the town. "We are far enough from merchants' territory that people are less likely to recognize you, but prejudice against orcs exists everywhere. If anyone gives you trouble, walk away. Do not engage." Kessa's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "I have lived with human prejudice my entire life. I know how to avoid unnecessary confrontation." They made their way to the general store, a large building near the center of town. The proprietor, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, looked up as they entered, and her gaze immediately fixed on Kessa with obvious suspicion. "We do not serve orcs," she said flatly. Isaac felt Kessa tense beside him, but he kept his own expression neutral. "She is with me. We need basic supplies. Food, medical materials, travel gear. I can pay in gold." The mention of gold made the woman hesitate. Prejudice and greed warred on her face before greed won. "Gold first, then I will consider it." Isaac pulled out a small pouch and placed several gold coins on the counter, more than the supplies would cost, but enough to ensure cooperation. The woman's eyes widened slightly at the amount, and her hostility shifted to wary avarice. "What do you need?" They spent the next hour restocking their supplies. The proprietor remained cold but civil, clearly willing to tolerate Kessa's presence as long as the gold kept appearing. When they finally left the store, both of them were laden with packs containing enough food for several weeks, new medical supplies, and fresh clothing to replace their worn travel gear. "I hate this," Kessa said quietly as they walked toward the inn. "The way she looked at me, like I was some kind of animal that might bite her. I hate that gold is the only reason she tolerated my existence. I know. I am sorry." Isaac wanted to take her hand, but knew public displays of affection between them would only make things worse. "It will be better once we find a place to settle. Not perfect, but better." The inn was more welcoming, largely because the owner was a grizzled ex-soldier who had apparently fought alongside orcs during some border conflict years ago. He gave them a room without comment and even offered a polite nod to Kessa, which seemed to surprise her. That night, lying together in an actual bed for the first time since this journey began, Isaac and Kessa talked about their plans. "Where do we go from here?" Kessa asked, her head resting on his chest. "We cannot just wander forever." "I was thinking about that. There are frontier homesteads in the far eastern territories, beyond the settled regions. Land is cheap because it is hard living, but it is also far from authorities and prejudices. We could claim a piece of land, build a home, start fresh. Homesteading. You want to become a farmer or a hunter and guide, something that uses our skills but does not require chasing people for money." He stroked her hair gently. "I know it is not glamorous, but it would be ours. We could build something real, something that lasts." Kessa was quiet for a long moment. "I like that idea, a home that belongs to us, where we do not have to hide or apologize for being together. It sounds like a dream. Then let us make it real." They left Millbrook the next morning and continued east. The landscape gradually transformed from arid wastes to rolling grasslands, and then to mixed forests as they entered the true frontier regions. They passed through several more towns, experiencing varying degrees of hostility toward Kessa, but Isaac's gold and stern demeanor usually smoothed over the worst of it. 3 weeks after leaving Millbrook, they finally reached the Frontier Claims Office in a settlement called Harvest Glen. The clerk was a tired-looking man who barely glanced at Kessa before laying out maps showing available homestead lands. "Most of the Good Valley land is claimed," he explained, "but there are still parcels available in the hill country to the north. 100-acre plots, yours for a nominal fee and the promise to improve the land within 3 years." Isaac studied the maps. The hill country parcels were isolated, surrounded by forest, with streams running through many of them. It was exactly the kind of place where they could build a life away from prying eyes and judgmental neighbors. "This one," he said, pointing to a parcel that sat in a small valley between 2 ridges. "Is it still available?" The clerk checked his records. "Yes. 100 acres, good water access, some cleared land from a previous claimant who abandoned it. I should warn you, it is a full day's ride from the nearest settlement. You will be very isolated." "That is fine." Isaac placed gold on the counter. "We will take it." The clerk processed the paperwork efficiently, clearly not caring who bought the land as long as the fees were paid. Within an hour, Isaac and Kessa owned a piece of the frontier, a place that would be entirely theirs. They rode north the next day, following the map to their new property. It took them most of the day to find the parcel, but when they finally arrived as the sun was setting, Isaac knew they had made the right choice. The land was beautiful. A small valley tucked between forested ridges, with a clear stream running through the center. The previous owner had cleared several acres and built the foundation of a cabin before abandoning the claim, which would save them months of work. There were fruit trees growing wild, and the surrounding forest was thick with game. "It is perfect," Kessa said, dismounting and walking to the stream. She knelt and splashed water on her face, then looked around at the valley with an expression of wonder. "I never imagined having a place like this." Isaac joined her by the stream. "We will need to build shelter before winter, which gives us about 4 months. It will be hard work." "I am not afraid of hard work." "I know you are not." They set up a temporary camp that night and began planning the construction in the morning. The foundation was solid, and with the amount of timber available from the surrounding forest, they could build a substantial cabin. Isaac had some carpentry skills from his youth, and Kessa proved to be surprisingly good at notching logs and thinking through structural problems. The work consumed them for the next 3 months. They fell into a rhythm, rising with the sun and working until darkness forced them to stop. They felled trees, stripped logs, hauled them to the building site, and slowly assembled walls. Isaac taught Kessa what he knew about construction, and she brought her own insights from orc building traditions. They argued sometimes about the best approach to a problem, but the arguments were always productive. Two people who respected each other working toward a common goal. In the evenings, they would sit by their campfire and talk about their plans. They wanted to plant crops in the spring, establish a vegetable garden near the cabin, maybe get some chickens and goats. Isaac could supplement their food stores by hunting, and Kessa knew enough about medicinal herbs to create a small income by gathering and selling them in Harvest Glen. It would not be an easy life, but it would be theirs. As summer faded into autumn, the cabin took shape. It was simple but solid, with a good roof to keep out the rain and snow, a large fireplace for heat, windows that could be shuttered against storms, and enough interior space for comfortable living. They built a small barn as well, just large enough for the 2 horses they had acquired and storage for winter supplies. The day they finished the cabin, Isaac and Kessa stood in the doorway looking at what they had created together. It was not much by the standards of established society, just a rough frontier homestead in an isolated valley. But to Isaac, it represented something he had never had before, a real home. "We did it," Kessa said, leaning against his side. "We built ourselves a life. We are not done yet. Winter is coming, and we still need to lay in enough supplies to last until spring." Always practical. She turned to look up at him. "Can you be impractical for one moment and just appreciate what we have accomplished?" Isaac pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. "We escaped a corrupt lord, crossed the scarred wastes, survived rock drakes and prejudice and nearly dying of thirst, and built a home with our own hands in a place where we can be together without fear. That is pretty amazing. Much better." She kissed him softly. "Now we just need to make it through the winter without killing each other from cabin fever. I think we can manage that." Winter came early to the hill country, with the first snow falling in mid-autumn. Isaac and Kessa had worked hard to prepare, and their cabin was well stocked with food, firewood, and supplies. The cold months that followed were challenging in their own way, long periods of isolation broken only by occasional trips to Harvest Glen for necessities. But the isolation also gave them time to simply be together without the pressure of survival or construction deadlines. They played card games that Marcus had taught Isaac years ago. They cooked elaborate meals just because they could. They spent long evenings by the fire talking about everything and nothing. And they made love in the warm cocoon of their cabin while snow fell silently outside, learning each other's bodies and hearts with patient tenderness. One night in deep winter, as they lay tangled together under thick blankets, Kessa spoke into the darkness. "I want to marry you." Isaac's heart skipped a beat. "What?" "I want to marry you. By orc custom or human custom or some combination we make up ourselves. I want to stand before whatever witnesses will tolerate us and declare that we belong to each other." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "I know it will not be legal in many places. I know there will be people who refuse to recognize it. But I do not care. I love you and I want the world to know it." Isaac felt emotion clog his throat. "I want that too, more than I can say." "Then ask me properly." He laughed, then shifted so he was kneeling beside the bed, naked and ridiculous and completely sincere. "Kessa of the Ironjaw clan, will you marry me?" "Yes, Isaac Zimmerman, I will marry you." They married in early spring when the snow had melted enough to make travel possible. The ceremony was small, held in the valley by the stream with only 2 witnesses. The ex-soldier innkeeper from Harvest Glen and his wife, who had become friendly with Isaac and Kessa over the winter months. The innkeeper's wife had some knowledge of orc marriage customs and helped them blend traditions from both cultures. Kessa wore a simple dress they had sewn together from cloth purchased in Harvest Glen, dyed green to match her skin. Isaac wore his cleanest traveling clothes and the silver medallion that had belonged to Marcus. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to stand together through whatever challenges came, to build a life of respect and love, to honor each other's differences rather than trying to erase them. When the innkeeper pronounced them married by the authority of common law and frontier custom, Isaac kissed his wife for the first time, and it felt like the beginning of something vast and precious. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. The homestead prospered slowly as Isaac and Kessa worked the land and established their place in the frontier community. Prejudice remained, especially from newcomers to the region, but over time the locals came to accept the strange couple in the northern hills. Isaac's skills as a tracker and guide brought in steady income, and Kessa's knowledge of medicinal herbs made her valuable during illness and injury. They faced challenges. Harsh winters, crop failures, dangerous wildlife, and the occasional traveler who thought to cause trouble for an orc woman living openly with a human man. But they faced everything together, as partners in the truest sense, and their love deepened with each passing season. On a warm summer evening 5 years after they had first met, Isaac and Kessa sat on the porch they had added to the cabin, watching the sun set over their valley. Kessa's hand rested on her slightly rounded belly, the first physical sign of the child growing inside her. It had been a surprise and a source of wonder for both of them, as half-orc children were rare enough to be nearly legendary. "You ever regret it?" Kessa asked suddenly. "Burning that contract, giving up your old life for this?" Isaac considered the question seriously, looking out at the land they had claimed and built and made into a home. He thought about the man he had been 5 years ago, lonely and increasingly hollow, chasing bounties and telling himself it was enough. Then he looked at his wife, at the life they had created together, at the future growing inside her. "Not for a single moment," he said. "You are the best decision I ever made." Kessa smiled, that beautiful smile that still made his heart do complicated things in his chest. "Good answer." They sat together as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. Two people who should never have met, who should never have fallen in love, who should never have survived the obstacles placed in their path. But they had met, and they had fallen in love, and they had not just survived but built something lasting and true. The contract had burned away to ash 5 years ago, and from those ashes had grown a life neither of them could have imagined. A life worth living, a life worth fighting for. A life they would defend and cherish for all the years to come. Isaac reached over and took Kessa's hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. She squeezed back, and no words were needed. They had found their home, found their purpose, found each other. The rest of the world could think what it wanted. Here in this valley, they were exactly where they belonged, together.